Hopefully, as we go through these conversations, you'll see that there is a bit of a different perspective, that you can find that talent if you're open to a little bit of change and a little bit of flex to basically see they will be celebrated then, absolutely, because it will mean that whole communities are going to massively benefit from employment alongside, obviously, where
I think that's a really exciting opportunity. The idea that when these buildings are created, they could create employment opportunities and a sense of ownership, a collective sense of ownership of where they're being placed. That's a really great idea.
Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Nick, joined by my co-host Hannah. Today where we're going to be talking about, do data centres have to be ugly? So we're joined by our guest, Jack Carter. Jack, if you could just talk us through a bit about your career. It's been a pretty special career.
Well, look, firstly, thank you for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here, so thank you. My name's Jack Carter. My career started in Paris. I went off to Paris for a short 6 weeks and ended up staying for 20 years. I worked for an architect called Renzo Piano, who built the Pompidou Centre and buildings all over the world. And it took me on this amazing journey, engaging in cities around the world, building big iconic buildings such as the Shard and the New York Times headquarters. I then came back to London and set up my own practice, which is where I met Hana. And we engaged on an amazing building in Boutle for Santander, of which had many parallels with data centres in its drive for efficiency. And that sort of brought me here, I guess.
Which one was your favourite? We need to check this.
They're fact-checking recording. What was your favourite project you ever worked on, Jack?
The project that we did together, I remain really proud of. It's an amazing building, and has had a big impact on lots of ideas that we carry forward.
It's great fun. It was for anybody that doesn't know, Bootle is a place in Liverpool, and it was a gyrobank building. So it's one of the first ever digital bank buildings that was built in the 60s. I say digital bank building, and it took us on a real history lesson when we were there, and it was all designed around bringing in communities into this space, which was a very cute community driven location. When it came to Bootle, they were very family orientated, and we managed to meet some amazing people who some of them had worked in the same place for 50, 60 years. And so there was a huge amount of responsibility that we felt we had to ensure that we did this space some justice. And I use the word we, I did nothing. It was Jack, there's the architect. And you did an amazing design for that building. And it was such a beautiful, beautiful project.
I suppose in a nutshell, the project looked a bit like a data centre when we first arrived. And our brief was to take it apart, make it as permeable, as accessible as possible, and transform how it engaged with the local community. And I think there's a few parallels there, perhaps, as data centres start to move into our cities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it definitely leads on to like my next question, really, because as you say, a lot of these data centres are being built closer to local communities, where there needs to be an approval from the local council and the local community on those. So how important do you see, data centres, being more appealing, more attractive, physically, to obviously getting that approval process through, or for obviously appeasing local communities and councils?
Look, I think the first thing to say is that data centres are buildings like any other building. They need a planning consent. They need to adhere to local policy. They need to engage with whatever the context and community is. I think this drive to efficiency in data centres somehow gives the perception that it's not a building like others, but it is. And therefore, I think we need to treat them as such. And I think the industry needs to acknowledge that we need to engage in local policy. We need to engage with local councils, and we need to take people with us on that journey.
Yeah. And do you think that, with the Bootle as an example, where it sounds like from what you're saying, it's really connected to the local community and how you can make it work for the local community? Like, I know it's still a building, but is there any ideas that you have, Jack, from working in this space alongside Hannah and others, about how we can make data centres work for local communities?
Absolutely. I think there's a number of opportunities. I mean, firstly, I think not all sites are going to be just large empty spaces where efficiency can drive a plan and land use isn't at a premium. As we start to encroach in other sites, form and massing, context, outward appearance, look and feel, these are all subjects that are going to be needed to be balanced against that drive for efficiency. Yeah. And I think ultimately, the best buildings are many ways the buildings that are compromised or challenged by their context, and they need to respond. And often that responding to context and place leads to a more interesting and a more developed piece of architecture.
I guess you've got to find a balance. There's a challenge from an industry perspective. There's this growth of AI. AI's taken off. It's mainstream. The requirement for data centers and capacity has expanded so fast. And so with that, the need for data centers has gone from, you've got power, you've got land, you build this thing and you build it as fast as possible and you make it as efficient as possible. And they don't make any money until they're operational. So you make them, as operationally efficient, but also you want them live as quickly as possible. So there's almost this trying to find a balance between the design to make it something that's really attractive, works for the local community, and some organisations are doing a really good job of exactly that. There's a campus in London, I think it's Ada, I know I've met in the past, plugging them now, but they've got a campus and it's about the community, and they have the community are going to come in and they've got this shared space, a bit like we did, where data centers, and I absolutely agree, there's a lot of correlations between the site that we worked on, which had this big fence around it. It was completely secure, like we have in data centers. You had to go through a very high security process to enter this particular site and the grounds before getting into the building, because it was seen as a financial services institution and it was a bank. That's changed. It's changed from a financial services point of view. And data centers, it's going to be quite interesting because they are very secure and there's a need for them to be secure. But actually, the way in which data centers are potentially designed in certain locations as campuses doesn't mean that just because they're secure, you can't have, amenities and facilities that make them accessible to the community that they're in and around. And that's where they will become, I think, more appealing to councils and regulators who are looking at them. But really, from a development perspective, I don't think I've ever sat in a meeting. Please don't fire me, JLL. But I don't think I've ever sat in a meeting where anybody's come to me and said, I really want this to look beautiful and attractive. It's really just been, we've got power, we've got land, how do we build this as quickly as possible? And we're focusing our attention on the fact that we need to get, long lead items and think about procurement. And it's really a very delivery focused conversation rather than a community and a design focused discussion.
I think it's interesting to look back in history a bit, really, too. I think if we look back to, say, the Victorians, who built amazing industrial architecture in all of our cities and towns, there was a celebration of that kind of utilitarian industrial architecture. And the Tate, Bankside, these are power stations built in the middle of our city, which are now celebrated as kind of cathedrals of art. And I don't see why data centers are immune from that celebration of something which is incredibly efficient and quite industrial. I think there's a place in our built environment for that. And I don't know why we've slightly lost the thread of why data centers should be beautiful. I think all buildings should be beautiful in their own way.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think if I was to go and speak to some of my friends or even my colleagues upstairs and said draw a data center, I know that they would probably just draw a box or a cloud. But there'll be no in between, and because I think generally, I think not the ones you see in the most press with, but certainly when you see negative press, when it's say council's not approving them, and it is usually just this big metal box.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't think there needs to be, from my perspective, drastic change. It's just some certain things that would make it a little bit more practical or livable or less visible. I think there's a building where I live, and it's a huge pharmaceutical building in the middle of a small town. and they've literally just covered the walls in plants. So when you drive past it, you can't see it,
Yeah. but
but it's massive. So like that sort of thing I think would be, it's only a small change,
Yeah.
would make a massive difference.
And I mean, to be honest, not all data centers are ugly.
No.
Like, it's a good catchy headline, Nick. But you know, we there are data centers that there's the Olympics, and again, it's beauty in the eye of the beholder. But there's the Olympics building in Beijing, and it's really brutalist architecture, but it's really cool looking, and it's actually a really nice one. And then you've got some, we're talking about it in the caves and salt mines, and so the reality of data centers is that they're still changing. Previously, there was a real need for them to be in inner cities. Now latency is less of a challenge, and it's all about where power is available. But I guess, Jack, you are highly celebrated in your field. Have an amazing mind as somebody who's worked with you. I'd love to hear more around your thoughts on the design of data centers themselves, and how can the industry what would you advise us as a sector and as industry to do? Free consultancy here, to really evolve as a sector and start to have conversations in meetings where we're not just talking about speed of development.
Well, I think a lot of this is about problem solving. I think architects are actually quite good at problem solving. It's a diverse subject, and I think data centers are going to, as we have more and more of them, they are going to be part of our built environment, a key part of our infrastructure, like those Victorian pumping stations in a way. And I don't see why we don't apply the same rigor and processes that we apply to any other building. And so therefore I think architects are important in that as a role. In terms of fitting them in and I wouldn't say beautifying them, but giving them more purpose. I think beauty comes in many different ways. I think as architects, we're fascinated by data centers because of this drive for efficiency, the idea that a building needs to be as efficient as possible in every aspect is quite unusual. It's a very pure kind of approach to designing something, and I think this approach of as data centers move nearer to the built up environment of our cities, I think they are going to need to evolve and change in what they give back. As you mentioned, Nick, to the communities, to the built environment, and there's a real opportunity there to have more of a positive impact on the environment around the data centers. I think there's a couple of missing typologies which have yet to be explored in terms of data centers. There's data centers which are in the middle of nowhere. There's data centers which are under the ground. There's data centers which are retrofitted into existing structures and buildings. And I guess I'm really interested in how data centers might activate and cross-program other typologies next to them. Data centers produce vast amounts of heat. Our hospitals, our schools, our homes need heat. How can we start to harness that and create some connectivity across society? I think data centers are going to need to be more sustainable. At the moment, it's quite black box and kind of tech driven. I think actually, as we move forward, physically what data centers are made out of and how much carbon's in there is going to become more important. And I think that may open the door to different materials, more recycled, more sustainable materials. The fact that they need to be cooled in a huge way. I think very few people have explored how you might do that more passively with different materials. I think ultimately most of the data centers in the world today at scale don't present a very human character. And I think as these buildings start to engage with society on a larger scale, and they may start to have more character and presence, I think the humanizing of data centers is going to become much more important.
But do you think that in my head, I'm actually balancing that I don't disagree with you, Jack, but also at the same time, it's seen as a security risk. And I think it's finding the balance between having these, almost making them, if anything, actually what you're saying is right. If they blended and integrated in a way that makes them less conspicuous, and they become more secure as a result. I mean, I'm intrigued to hear your view on data centers, and I'm from an architect's perspective, in the sense that, do you guys see us as a sector, as a population or a sector in the first place? Because we talk a lot about, when you talk about architects, you think about residential or you think about corporate offices. Are we even on the radar for architects?
Absolutely. I think it's not all architects, but yeah, we as a practice are really interested in industrial architecture. We're building a bridge at the moment in Canada Water, and I think these bits of infrastructure, as I was alluding to with the Victorians, we look back, our cities are full of other industrial practical things, and I think we see data centres very much in that category, and it's a sector which is going to get more prominent in our cities. And so, yeah, absolutely, it's recognised as a sector by the architectural profession.
Yeah, I think that's definitely food for thought for the entire sector and industry, really, is the role of architects within there. Because as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't tend to be a discussion point. When we think design, we think engineering design, we think about infrastructure rather than architecture.
Yeah.
It's about building as quick as possible.
Yeah. I think there's also some fantastic buildings delivered by great architects around process and industry. And I think we could learn a lot from looking back to those buildings. There's some early Norman Foster buildings around factories and electronics. I think there's all sorts of precedent that we could celebrate around data centres. It would be really interesting.
I mean, even the modular building that we did in Bootle, the design was modular. It was actually not. It was a beautiful CLT building, highly sustainable, considered the environment, but it wasn't going to take 5 years to construct. So actually, when you talk about materials and we talk about whole life carbon and we think about sustainability in the world that we're in and the community aspect, I think having architects early as part of those conversations could bring a really beautiful angle to the sector that evolves us and hopefully makes us less challenged generally within communities, because actually we're not putting just a metal box in a field behind their houses. Not that we do that, but you know.
There you go, have that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just a sort of general question, Jack. Like, because of how many data centres are being built globally, I always look at it from a talent lens, obviously working in recruitment. So do you think with, the amount of data centres being built, it makes your industry more accessible as well to people that would look to maybe get into architecture, because there's a volume of work there and a consistency of work over the next 5 to 10 years that would think, that this is something I want to get into? Because part of the conversation we're obviously trying to get around here is that it's quite it's a huge market, but it's also small in terms of the sort of talent density at the moment. And it's like, how can we make all of this more accessible to everyone? So is that a view you would share?
It's a good question. All our industries are becoming more specialist. Hannah's worked in a range of different typologies and sectors, and she's applying her skills in the same way now into the data center market. Architects do the same. There is a tendency for architects to specialist, become a leading hospital architect, a leading residential architect, a leading commercial architect. Our approach, our practices approach, is more generalist. We are design specialists, and we approach all projects in the same way. Our processes and our design methodologies in many ways are more universal. We're more interested in the problem-solving aspect and the innovative aspect of finding new solutions to current day problems. And I think that's why there is an opportunity for architecture with a capital A and data centres, because I think it's emerging into an industry where architecture was not really thought to be a contributing factor in that drive to efficiency. And some of the projects that you've described to me, Hannah, it's clear that there wasn't an architect in the room when those projects first came to light. And I think there is a huge opportunity, and I think people will be attracted to the sector of data centers. Yes.
Mm.
You've done some amazing projects, not just the ones that we've talked about, but are there any particular projects that are worth kind of, I know a few of them that we talked about around communities, anything that you could kind of give us a little bit of background on that you've worked on recently, thinking about communities?
Yeah, we've just got planning consent for the London Stock Exchange's new headquarters in Paternoster Square. Okay. And this is an existing building which is a retrofit, a deep retrofit. And it's a building which is a high quality, well-designed building that should be able to continue to serve a client through multiple generations. And our job there was to really understand what the client's needs were and really give the building a transformation to take it forward through the next cycle of development. And a lot of that was around a much more outward facing projection of this client, the London Stock Exchange. And I think we'll see more of that. I think the idea of buildings being hermetic boxes with solid walls, with no engagement, I think we will see a move towards more engagement, more community engagement. And community in all senses, whether it's Paternoster Square or if you're next to a housing estate and you've located a data centre there, I think these buildings are going to need to engage more. We've also recently completed a planning application which was consented for a housing scheme for the council for Westminster. And this was an interesting issue, again, which would come up in the context of putting these buildings in built environments. It had a series of community facilities on the land that they wanted to develop. And our brief was to retain these in the future design. And it's a nice example where data centers may be able to start to give something back. So rather than locate the games area in a different site, we integrated it into the architecture, and it actually became the front door of the building as a multi-use games area. And this really anchored the building and with the community and put it on the map in terms of what it was trying to achieve. I don't see why data centers can't offer more in the way of facilities, engagement, an offering to the community.
I think we'll see more and more of that in planning and regulation anyway, but actually we've got some really, really positive examples. In Germany, as an example, through heat reuse, we're heating, a data center is heating a local swimming pool. Yeah. And it's making, the community's services more accessible. And I think we do get a lot of bad press as a sector, as an industry, and we're always getting challenged, which is good in a sense that it keeps us on our toes and makes us kind of continue to think about our evolution. But a lot of the time when that press comes in, we tend to see on social media, we become a little bit of an echo chamber where, a guy will post in data centers about the fact that we've had bad press, and somebody else in data centers will say, oh yes, but look at all the amazing things that we're doing. Whereas it's like we're preaching to the converted, really. I'm in data centers, you're in data centers, we're talking to each other. And I think we as a sector need to do a lot more work in this space to educate outwards. One of the reasons for this particular podcast series in the first place, and when we were talking, Jack, was, we need to now bring in fresh talent, fresh perspectives, and also at the same time continue to evolve as a sector by having those perspectives and utilising through design, through sustainability, through community engagement, the spaces differently to enable us to then actually contribute back to society. And that's not just through the role that data centres play in the technology, but yeah, exactly, as it's engaging with that that local community and jobs as well. You know, we're creating jobs in a world where it is evolving, and we're going through another industrial revolution, aren't we, at the moment through AI?
Yeah. I mean, do you think that with a broader understanding of AI and technology in the public domain, there is a place for data centers being celebrated as data centers? Up until now, data centers have been largely hidden from society, and for a whole range of other reasons around security, they're often not known about. Do you see them as that changing?
On a very personal note, I would like that to change. It's one of the main reasons for setting up the initiative that I've set up with JLL, which is called The Leap, because I do see that the data center sector needs help. We need help in the sense that we need to attract more talent. We have an aging population, so quite a few, according to the Uptime Institute, 75% of the population are due to hit retirement age over the next couple of years. And already we know that the level of growth within the sector has meant that we're struggling with a shortage of talent. Then you layer that with the locations of where data centers are built at the moment. It's really focused on power and land. And so you do have more data centers going into, say, the Nordics. And some of them are 6 hours away from, you know, a central airport. And so you've got a hidden sector that's also got an aging population that's very, very technical. And also we have this requirement to build at speed against locations that can be quite remote and quite challenging. So we have to evolve, in my personal view. We have to share the value that we add in modern society, because I don't think we have a choice. I think between regulation and between a need to attract talent and the population that's going to be required to develop these, we have to share the role that they play and make them more visible, and integrate them into society and make them a normal thing, in the same way that the Victorians did, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's like I think it needs to be more malleable. Because I think when I think of locations of where they could build some of these, particularly if we look to the UK again as an example, there's so many places of industry where there is an aging workforce, but it's a workforce that has not much work right now. You know, there's obviously in the northwest, in the north, you've obviously got a lot of, you know, oil like chemical refineries. There's a lot of heavy industry in certain locations which has been shutting down. And there's individuals that have got very strong, you know, electrical, mechanical design backgrounds in that particular area that could potentially be out of work. So there's whole communities that have spent their entire lives working on these sort of assets. And it's, if we can be a bit more open to taking talent from those other spaces, you're going to get a really dedicated, experienced local workforce that's built, to be honest, far more complex things in the past. So I think if you know, hopefully as we go through these conversations, you'll see that there is a bit of a different perspective, that you can find that talent if you're open to a little bit of change and a little bit of flex, to basically see they will be celebrated then, absolutely, because it will mean that whole communities are going to massively benefit from employment alongside, obviously, where
I think that's a really exciting opportunity. The idea that when these buildings are created, they could create employment opportunities and a sense of ownership, a collective sense of ownership of where they're being placed. That's a really great idea.
Thank you. Perfect. Well, look, Jack, thank you so much for coming in today and giving us your insight on this. It's been really, really valuable. I completely agree. Like, I think there's definitely a way, you know, to harmonise with society and the public, and you know, the physical aspects of data centres, to make them more appealing to the general public through architecture. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for joining again for episode 2. See you soon.